tell you right now. So it is recording now. So let's make a formal introduction for our listener. Good afternoon, Luke. My name is Claudio. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C., from the studios in Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Luke Seomore accepted our invitation to our show. Luke, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk
Totally,
to you.
man. So tell me, with everything that's going on in the world, with the pandemic, the virus, people not receiving the vaccine, no shows, inability to go out, how you manage mentally, your work, your family?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first, because I'm in London and we're on like the third lockdown. The first one was the hardest, I think, for getting your head around it and understanding it. But now there's a little bit of, and that was obviously just for everyone a bit of a bleak time in humanity, as it were. But now it does feel like there's a little bit more light. We're kind of basic creatures. I think when the seasons change, that helps us a lot. And spring's coming, and there's a vaccine, so there is some kind of hope. But it's been. I've got a 2-year-old son, so he's going to have his his third birthday soon, and his second birthday was in a lockdown as well. So for him, it's just like he's just accepted it. It's amazing how kids are quite versatile. But it's been hard, and I actually got COVID last year, so I've kind of seen every little aspect of it. But looking forward to getting out there.
When will it start opening up in London? Because it's still the majority of the show were canceled, right? So
Yeah, I think from the mid-April, the cafes and the pubs are going to be opening, and then I think it's May, the cinemas, and maybe some venues with outside spaces, and then it's the indoor, like the clubs, as in nightclubs, are going to be like June-ish time. So it's like gradually opening up. But I was walking past a woman the other day, and she was talking about her 15-year-old daughter, and I think if you're 15, she was telling the story of like how the kid said to her, like, "It's all right for you, mum. You had your your year as being a 15-year-old. I didn't." And it's kind of interesting to see that generation, such a transitional moment, and they've kind of lost that time. So it's kind of interesting and intense to experience that. But things are starting to open up again, and it'll be great to see live music and go to galleries and get back into the cinema, because that's obviously been missed greatly.
Absolutely, man. Were you born like in a musical family when you began playing keyboard, piano, that kind of stuff?
Not really. There was no one in my family that played music at all, and I remember my granddad bought me a little Spanish guitar, and then my dad, who's like massively into music but not very musical, he tuned it, but he didn't really know how to tune it, so he just broke all the strings. And I remember the guitar being in the little half-size Spanish guitar. The guitar was always in the corner of the room without any strings. And then when I was about 14, 15, I started to play, and the first time I ever played outside is there was an oxygen tank that my sister used to go in to get extra oxygen for a disability, and there was a kid in there who was autistic, but his mum was claustrophobic, so his mum didn't want to go into this, like, it's like a small little metal container, and the pressure intensifies and the oxygen is increased, and it's good. Sports athletes go in there to heal quicker, and it's good if you've got any kind of helps the brain. And so the kid was autistic and get really stressed out being in this tank, and his mum was too claustrophobic to be in there. So I'd play guitar to try and calm him down, and that was the first time I've ever like played in front of people. And then since then I started to play. I played in some bands, but I didn't really make music I thought was any good to a certain degree. There was nothing that I felt I wanted to get out. And it was only until I started writing soundtracks to the films that myself and my filmmaking partner, Joseph Ball, that's when it felt like I was creating my own world, and I was creating my own sounds, and that kind of fed into the musical project.
And then did you go to after the equivalent of high school, any university where you took classes and composition?
Not for me. I remember early on, there was like a guitar teacher I visited, and he was quite like a quite good character. And I remember he always had these exceptionally long nails, and now playing guitar, I understand why. And he gave me a couple of lessons, but it was fairly kind of like informal. And I remember playing guitar on like a station. It was a little place in Essex, which is kind of like east of London, like a small town. And these two guys walked past, and he looked at me and went, "Yeah, give up, mate." And I remember that kind of the kind of character I am. That kind of made me not want to ever give up. But I never really had. It was just I'm just kind of self-taught, and I don't know if that's inspired how I make stuff, but the simplicity of things is something I'm kind of drawn to, and I kind of started getting into minimalist, playing, stuff like Velvet Underground or Steve Reich or those kind of things, which had that, or the Fool had that repetition, or Neu, the German band, had that repetition simplicity, which kind of captured my imagination. That's kind of how I started to play in this kind of repetitive looping kind of way. But I never really kind of formally trained. It was just, if I needed a certain sound, I just learned in a kind of rudimental way how to play something and then built upon that.
Yeah. What kind of is but at the time when you were, finishing the equivalent of high school here, what bands were you listening to at the time? What was
Well, it
popular
was,
band that you listened to?
yeah, it was kind of the 90s, mid 90s. There was, bands like Oasis and all those. For a kid coming from like a working class background, there was, before, there's the manufactured pop of the 80s, and this was a time when bands like Nirvana or Oasis or My Bloody Valentine, Primal Scream started coming about, and bands like Spiritualized, they were the kind of bands I was listening to, and I always would like obsessively get the magazines and read what kind of bands they were into, and then you'd hear about Bitches Brew, or you'd hear about Tangerine Dream, or Can, or Miles, like Miles Davis, and you'd hear about all these amazing musicians that inspired them, and that kind of opened it up. It was kind of like pre-internet, so those were the kind of bands that were like opening me up. And there was a Scottish band called Mogwai who started around that same time, who were a kind of instrumental band who were influenced by they were like a noise rock, post-rock band, which they're still going now, but they were quite something that kind of really excited me as someone leaving school. They started off around that mid to late 90s.
And then were you at the time, were you buying a lot of, I don't know, soundtracks to these? Or...
Yeah, I remember one of the first things I really kind of got into was my uncle brought back, part of my family is Scottish and on my mum's side, and he went off to Dallas in the 80s, and then he'd come back from the States and bring us stuff. I remember him bringing a cassette of the Blade Runner soundtrack, and I remember playing that a lot. And I remember, like, I was pretty young at that point, but I remember thinking that was really amazing. I did, I bought soundtrack. I bought, there was a Canadian band called Godspeed You Black Emperor. I remember like vividly buying that CD, and that was like, I couldn't believe how amazing that was. And again, going to buy Brew, and then also, there was a lot of kind of like strange hip hop at the time as well. A guy called Dr. Octagon was releasing these really interesting albums. So it was quite like a mixture of things that I was buying. And as I started to study, I left school and studied art in East London. You're open up to all the amazing kind of record stores, and so that was like another kind of like finding out about.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Blade Runner soundtrack from the first one. I think it's from '92. That was that was an unbelievable movie as well. You know, way Blade Runner was, you know, Vangelis was very well known, but the movie itself was way ahead of its time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's there's still it's interesting how it still sounds kind of quite fresh.
Oh
You know,
yeah,
you could
yeah.
put that soundtrack onto a film now, and people are like, "Oh, that this is an amazing soundtrack." So it's,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful soundtrack.
And the movie as well. You know, even
Yeah,
if even if the music, the film score wasn't that great, right?
yeah,
The movie is unbelievable. Very, very well done. I mean,
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's it's an amazing. That I mean, that was. I remember watching that and getting into. There's a Russian filmmaker called Andrei Tarkovsky, and watching Blade Runner and watching Solaris, which is like an amazing existential sci-fi film. But they kind of occupy the same space in my mind in those big, expansive worlds with those kind of like otherworldly scores, which are, yeah, just incredible.
yeah. At the time you, and so when was the point? And I'm sorry, hopefully they're doing some construction here in the second
Oh,
floor of the house, so hopefully it won't be too loud, man. And
problem.
at the time when you finished high school, your early 20s, is that when you decided that you wanted to be a musician? That was, you know, you
Yeah,
didn't know that film scored yet, but you knew that that kind of my art in a way, my area. That's
yeah, yeah. We started making art installations and documentaries, and it was when I put music through imagery, it started to make sense, and it started to have an identity, and yeah, it all kind of fell into place really. And I've always kind of wanted to play music, and it was only I was kind of slightly I just like playing music in my bedroom, but it wasn't. It was I had an ambition for it, but the music I was creating wasn't that amazing. So it was only when I started making films and making music to accompany them that the music started having its own identity. So it was yeah, leaving university, early 20s was when I started to kind of really take it seriously.
you remember the first film or short film that you guys put together, and what was the reaction on
Yeah,
the media? Yeah.
the first kind of film we did was a film called Lost and Found, and it was about we read about this guy who had knew it happens less now because this the way that society is set up, but he was born his mum he was born illegitimately. His mum abandoned him. He was born in a field, and he was brought up by a traveling community, and so he never had any documentation for his life. So he worked, just on building sites and just did manual labor. And then he got ill when he was in his 60s. So he went to the doctor to get treatment because he had no birth certificate, no social security number or anything like that. It was as if he didn't exist. So we made this film, and we used the idea was we were going to use stock footage. There was a guy called Umit in East London who had this amazing archive of Super 8 film that he collected from all different parts of the country. And so we used those Super 8 memories of other people to illustrate this guy's life. And then I did the score. And premiered at Edinburgh Film Festival, and that was quite amazing to see your film on the big screen and hear the sound. It was kind of reaction. I think people found it kind of quite emotional because this guy had the other thing that happened as well when we went to interview him. He was at a kind of drop-in center for people who are homeless, and the women there were talking to us, and they were like, "Oh, the paparazzi here." They were kind of joking, and then they said, "Oh, you know, he hasn't got a tongue." And again, we thought they were kind of still joking, even though it's slightly kind of dark humor. But it was true. We didn't know that because the reason why he took time off work is because he had cancer and he had to have his tongue removed. So the whole interview we did with him was really hard to decipher because he only didn't have a tongue. So then there was also a part of the documentary about transcribing what he was saying because what he was saying was quite unclear. And there was only some quite poignant bits we worked out right near before the film was supposed to be going to the film festival we put in there. So that it was, yeah, it was a kind of really interesting project, and it was that kind of good cross section of it. It was like art, fine art approach, but it was a documentary about a real person, so it gave it some kind of soul. And the score, because it was all the different elements of his life, the score could go into different places. At points it was like this kind of quite industrial music, and then other points it was more this kind of evocative, beautiful music when he was talking about his childhood, which in his eyes was quite a happy childhood.
Oh, and then what was uh, how difficult was to compose the music, and then from the film, and then what was the reaction on the market? I mean, when you guys presented that particular film.
Yeah, I found the music quite easy. I just, you know, with Joseph, just started writing it in little pieces, and then as we put it to the imagery, it started to really work. It was music I'd already written, so half it was music already written, so we placed it in there. I started writing new stuff, and then yeah, the film went around the world. It played in a lot of different festivals, and that was quite interesting, seeing the different cultural differences, how people, you know, maybe a country which was a bit more you know, social issues were taken more seriously, or had more funding in a way, that they saw it in a different way to another country. So it was interesting to see the different reactions from different countries, and because it was all subtitled, because you couldn't understand it, it was kind of like actually quite universal, because they didn't have to necessarily know the language. But yeah, it was a great. It was like Edinburgh Film Festival. It premiered, and yeah, a lot of people, I think, were quite moved by it, which was, yeah, amazing to see.
And that will lead you into what film after that. So because once you started, right, and you present in a festival and the people like the music, you know, like me on the radio, little by little you start increasing the reputation a little bit.
We did, that was just 15 minutes. Then we did a feature documentary called Isolation, which was about a guy called Stuart Griffiths, who was in the British Army, served in the 90s in Northern Ireland. Then he was going to either go to, what happened with him was he was in Warrington, Manchester in the 80s. You know, at that point in England, there wasn't a lot of opportunities if you were a young kid from that part of the country. And he started, you know, nicking cars, and got to a point where he got arrested for stealing a car. And you know, his mum gave him a bit of an ultimatum. Is like, you know, you can either just do this in a prison or do something. And going to the army was one of the few options he had. So he joined the army, but then kind of quite quickly became disillusioned by it, his time serving in Northern Ireland, and started taking photographs almost to document his time in the army. And then, you know, eventually he couldn't really take the idea of, he questioned why the army had, you know, why were we the army in Belfast? And they, you know, they always say your job is not to ask questions. And so eventually he left, and then he left the army and became homeless. And we found out that his story was quite a good kind of paradigm of what happens to a lot of soldiers of leaving the army, which is a very regiment, but a very kind of extreme existence in some ways, and then adapting to civilian life. And so the film was about his life, but it was also about him talking to, you know, this was 2007, 2008 when we were making it. So Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts were in the news quite a lot, but there wasn't really, at that point, wasn't really much about veterans or modern veterans in the UK. So it was about his life, and it was about all those service people, you know, adapting to regular life, and talking about post-traumatic stress. And you know, the interesting thing was, we talked to a guy called Simon Brown, and we said, why did you join the army? And the reason he said he joined the army is because it's like, he said, for the safety, which we didn't really think. We're not from a military background. No one was in our family was from a military background, so it was like we went into it open mind. And it was kind of interesting to hear that actually, because someone looked after you to a certain degree, they gave you a bed, they gave you your food, you were looked after within society. But then there was another side of your existence in the army, which was quite kind of perilous. So we made that film with Stuart and shot it him moving around the country interviewing other veterans, and because he was a veteran himself, these veterans would open up quite quickly, and so a lot of it is the filmed conversation of these people. That was kind of the idea, rather than the filmmakers or the musicians behind the project talking to the subject. It was someone who had, you know, an empathy with them, and as soon as he asked them where they served and he told them where he served, they just were a lot more open. Even though there was a small kind of camera crew there, they were a lot more open, and it was kind of quite moving to see them talk about their lives and explain how things have kind of unfolded. So we made that film, and then we started to do some live scores. So I composed the music, but then I would play a live version of the music accompanying the film. So the first time we did a live version of that was in Jersey. There's a Jersey Film Festival, and it was the War Tunnels, which is an interesting place because the War Tunnels was one of the few kind of occupied places within the British Isles. And originally they were going to stockpile all their military, you know, a lot of the armory in these tunnels. But as they started losing the war, it was a hospital. And then it's now a historical place. And then it's like a big cavernous, you know, tunnel. And we played in there, and the acoustics in there are quite strange. So it had quite a interesting effect on how we played. It sounded very big and very bassy, but it was quite an amazing experience to play that live and have the film playing at the same time. And from then we then played in the Barbican, the Roundhouse, and we had a kind of small tour of those with myself and Michael Garrett and David Stevens, two other musicians, and we toured around the country and playing different cinemas and kind of live, you know, art house, cross between art house, cinema, and live music venues across the UK.
Gotcha, man, that's a beautiful experience. I did have let's talk a little bit about the films, the albums. I had the opportunity to buy the 3 CDs or the equivalent EPs that I found on Bandcamp. One is I think the first one was one from April 18, 2020, which is called The Limitless Sweet Love of Precious Suffering. Man, that's well don't name, but it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful album, man. How that came together, man.
So that was something that was part. I started doing, you know, on the films, you'd make a lot of field recordings of, because you go to interesting spaces to make the films, and I just carried on like building a library of field recordings, and I used a lot of those to make that album. So the field recordings, I started mutating those and slowing them down, and then playing, you know, bass and guitar and piano, and then morphing those as well. And the idea of that was, a lot of the recordings I got were these abandoned spaces. You know, there's an interesting thing which is kind of one of the ideas behind the work is like the edgelands. The edgelands, has been books written about it. The edgelands is where the urban part of a city or a town melts into the countryside, and there's a weird little zone where it's not really a city anymore, and it's not really the countryside, and it's that and it's called the edgelands. And we visited a lot of those places to do some of the filming, and I got a lot of field recordings of those places, and those places have a kind of a haunting quality to them, but they're also kind of, because they've got the countryside there, that there's a kind of a beauty and a warmth to it. So that was the idea, that these kind of like empty spaces, I wanted to try and in the music create something quite emotional, because then they're not in a way that emotional because there's no human beings there. So I wanted to try and get this idea of like quite emotional, evocative music from these quite kind of uninhabited spaces.
And then so when you visit those places, where were you went there to get ideas, or you were kind of recording the stuff in kind of abandoned warehouses or parks or.
Sometimes we'd be going there to look to maybe film there, and then
Yeah.
and then because we started finding these places, I just sometimes go there just to make a field recording. At that point, I didn't really know exactly what it's for, and then when I started getting the music together, I the idea for the album started to form. But it was always making those recordings was always just a way of kind of, I guess, in the same way people take photos on their phone. It's this way of documenting experiencing these places, and until the kind of like first lockdown, when I had a bit of extra time, that I started to form them into that album.
I got you, got you. The other one that I listened was I woke up and forgot what happened.
Yeah.
That was another. you like you like you. I think to me that you are very picky in the name that you use. It's not an accident that you pick this word and the love, right?
Yeah. No, picking the names. I mean, with instrumental music, I think sometimes it's good to have like names that are kind of memorable, because you haven't got the lyrics to.
That's right. Yeah.
To kind of capture the imagination. So sometimes it's good, but that's why on the second album, or it's the first official album, Is My Destroy. That's I decided to try and get like a more simplified one, because to stop doing those longer ones. But I'm not. I do like those longer titles, but sometimes whenever you tell people, they never remember. That's the only draw.
That's right. So and then I listened to the whole Is My Destroy a couple of times, and it's a very very good album, and it's like I think in the stuff you send me, it's like a film without pictures, and so I listened to the whole album a couple of times when I was preparing for the interview. I didn't see the clip that you sent me as well in Vimeo, so I tried to imagine where the music could be applied to without knowing anything about the field, even if the field was done before and after or whatever. And it's a beautiful piece of music, man.
Oh, thank
very,
you.
very well done, man.
Thank you. I appreciate you listening.
Yeah, you need to show the stuff around, man. I mean, Bandcamp, you can do much better. I mean, people go to Spotify to look for new artists or Bandcamp, but you have the possibility to play the music live and let it be known outside, small places or.
So the album was put out by a German label called Wagner, and it's on Bandcamp, but it is also you can listen to it on Spotify, and I think Apple is on there. So they did release it there, and I mean, in non-pandemic times, we would definitely be playing that live, and I think that's when you're a new act, those kind of live pieces are live performances are vital. Obviously, it's kind of quite hard now, but we're trying to get the word out, and appreciate your time and taking interest in it, and we're just trying to get it out there as much as possible. And when we have when people do take notice, it's been a good reaction, and that album in particular I'm kind of proud of.
And then in order to make money in Spotify, you need to have whatever millions of listeners a month, but it's not the case here. But with respect to Spotify, you do okay in terms of sell. You're selling the stuff, people.
I mean, yes, but and I know I'm friends with some kind of bands that have got hundreds of thousands, millions of listens, and you still, even out of that, you don't. But I think the Spotify thing is stacked against anyone independent, because also the way they distribute the money is to the major labels. So unless you're with them, it's quite hard to monetize that. But I think Bandcamp is good because people know it's going directly to the artist. So you can, as an artist, that is a good way of supporting you. And I think that, again, if you're playing live, you can bring, we've got physical copies of the album. You can sell it. So I think that something like Spotify is quite good because it's open to anyone to get into there, and there is like free options. But I think if people want to support independent or new artists, then something like Bandcamp is good, because the money is predominantly going to the art. I think it's important that people who want to support independent artists go through those kind of routes. Rather, Spotify is great in getting it out there, but it doesn't really. You can't unless you're huge. It doesn't really give you a revenue at all.
Yeah, there gotta be something in between. I'm quite sure that Spotify became popular about, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, and then Bandcamp came along, but they gotta be, Spotify is a ripoff for artists,
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I think that there's you see that wave of anger really, since starting this project. Definitely seen that wave of anger for a lot of musicians, because it's not, it doesn't really serve the musicians at all. And it isn't. In some ways, it's amazing you get this catalog of music, but there's a lot of avant-garde stuff that's not on there that you can't find on there. So, and there's people like Jim O'Rourke, who is an amazing musician. A lot of his stuff isn't on there, which I quite like in a way, because it means that people have to find, it makes it a little bit more harder to find the music. But I think there'll be in the future, like, more independent created versions of Spotify, where there'll just be a small, I think there's even a company that started where it's a small group of musicians, and you have a subscription, and then from that your money goes to a small group of people, and they produce, you can only get the work through that. So I think that will come, but it's that kind of model is not
but Bandcamp, right, like you mentioned, I think they only take 7 or 8%, the rest go to the artists, and it's pretty good. It's very, very honest system where definitely as opposed to Spotify. If I have the time and the energy, I will write a new version of Spotify and make it free for people. Definitely. To listen to them. Okay, I wanna bring your attention to 3 particular songs. In particular, one was, what can you tell me about I Woke Up and I Forgot What Happened? How the composition came together?
That was I said before, I got COVID. We're supposed to be doing some filming in the Middle East, and I managed, as we traveled over there, before the filming happened, I got COVID. So then we had to isolate in a room for 2 weeks. Like all I saw was like just on the edge of the desert, just the road going off into the distance. And it didn't affect me too, like the first week I didn't feel too great, but the second week I was just kind of a bit bored and depressed sitting in this room all the time. But I started composing that track there, and we've all felt it a little bit in lockdown, where it's that sense of repetition, and I don't really like repetition in real life, but I quite like it in music. And so it was just trying to capture that. When you're on your own and you're isolated, some people will find it, but a lot of people don't want to get out of that situation. And that was just about you thinking about people you want to spend the time with, your friends, family, your lover, or whoever it may be. But it was that sense of kind of longing, and which was what that was about, really.
What about Milk? That's another beautiful piece.
That was part of that, the limitless sweet love of precious suffering. That was again, that was about that those abandoned spaces, and trying to put some emotion into that. So that was, in a way, that was the idea of that song and that album, was trying to get this kind of because it's got a lot of there's some violin there, there's got a lot of classical instruments, but they're all mutated and morphed. So it was that idea of trying to take the field recordings from these abandoned places and give it some, and transform it in something that had some life, that had some kind of emotion. And some of the titles you just pick them out of the ether. It was probably called Milk because I had a baby around that point, so that was
that was reason. And of course, Palace, which is a classic now, right? So how you put that together, man? Oh, that's beautiful, man.
Oh, thank
you. Remember when you start composing stuff, and how long
I do remember that. Yeah, that song did stand out, and then so I wrote the structure of it, and then I worked with a violinist called Susie Walsh, and she's really amazingly talented. We just worked through the song, and she kind of got what we were trying to communicate with that song, and it is about a kind of feeling. I think you know, with music, it's like it is instinctive, and just as it all started to you know melt together, it just felt right, and it happened quite quickly. It was and then we produced the film as well, and so it happened quick. But yeah, that's the kind of song which usually when people listen to music they gravitate towards.
Yeah. And then I obviously I saw the clip, the short film that you sent me with it, I think with Daniel Ward.
Yeah.
And it's now of course I know the music is very good, but uh, the way you filmed that and the cinematography was very well done. I mean, it's very good quality stuff. I'm detail oriented, right? So like you, so I look for different things, and it came together, man.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was again to do. You know, London at night is like quite a particular. We explored it in isolation a bit as well. It's a strange. I mean, even we shot that in just after the second lockdown that's just before the second lockdown. But it's usually the places we shot at that there's it's a bit like New York. There's all these different kind of lives going on, and it's kind of it's quite kaleidoscopic maelstrom of different lives. But because it was lockdown, there's hardly anyone around. So when the idea was like it was going to be like street photography, and we were going to film with this actor and put him in all these real situations. But because it was in the middle of the pandemic, there was hardly anyone on the street, so it kind of made it a different feeling. It made it a little bit more lonely. But because it's like about a paramedic and that decompression after the shift, it kind of made it a bit more poignant in a way. But yeah, we were really we had a great cinematographer, a guy called David Proctor, who shot that. So again, that was something that came about quite quickly, but we were kind of really happy with how it turned out.
And that made it into the clip, make it into a film, right? It's a film out there. Have been shown the film, or not yet, or not?
No, I mean we did. We are developing something which is a longer form, which is kind of inspired by that, which may be a TV series. So we're still kind of, which is based on a book. So that's like in the early. So that kind of helped get the rights to the book, but that's still in like early stages.
Yeah, and then from you in general terms, is it difficult to make a living out of being participating in film score and photography and kind of films, independent film? Is it difficult to?
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not definitely not easy, and it is. There are periods when sometimes you're just trying to develop a new project, but I think the pandemic has made it a lot. I mean, it's just harder to shoot full stop, so it's made it harder. So and what it's interesting to see what cinema's going to turn into post the pandemic. If cinema's going to be around, I'm sure they will be, but yeah, if independent film, especially in England, there's this small group of people who say yes or no, and if you don't get it past them, then it's very hard. Our first feature film that was funded through Italy, through the Venice Film Festival, even though it was all set in the UK. But I mean, the kind of beautiful thing that now you like something like Palace, you can make a film which has certain qualities, and it doesn't feel low budget, but you can make it for low budget. So there is a certain freedom with like the technology that's around now that gives you a liberation. But yeah, it's it's a kind of struggle. But I think if you're doing anything that's slightly new or slightly away from the mainstream, it's kind of always been that way. So you kind of accept that. But yeah, sometimes it's hard. But I think when you make something like that, or something like these albums, when it does come together, there is such an elation at the end that it's worth it in the end.
Looking back in your life, and especially last year now with the pandemic, a year or so, have you ever thought about, man, I better switch career, go back to school, pick another field, or how you?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes daily you have that kind of thought, but I think I remember in our school, we were quite young, we were about 8, and the headmaster told this story, and it's kind of a coming of age story. I think it's Doris Lessing wrote it. It's called The Tunnel, and it's about it's like a little cove. I think it's set in Italy, and there's these kids about 14. This boy who must be about 11 or 12 sees these kids swimming, and they suddenly disappear, and they suddenly come back, and they found a little underwater tunnel, and they're swimming, and they're bigger than this kid, and so they swim through, and then they try and peer pressure this kid into doing it, and he doesn't want to do it, and then he does it. And I remember that it was like quite terrifying thing that this teacher was telling, and also we didn't really understand the themes of it or the idea, but this kid's swimming through the tunnel, and his nose starts bleeding as he gets too far in, but he gets to the other side, and it's like a metaphor for he becomes an adult at that point. And I think that there is a certain degree to that, where like you're halfway down the tunnel, it's even more painful to go all the way back, so you just have to keep swimming, and then hopefully you come out into the bay. But I think there are days, and I've heard people who are very established and successful, and they still have those days where you think, I should have done something that's a little bit fits in with it. If you serve capitalist, if you serve and just don't put your head above the parapet and just play along, you'll be all right. But if you try and push against that, it's a little bit harder. But I think once you've decided that, you've got to keep on going, really.
Yeah, and in some cases, some people don't have any choice, right? So either, for you in your case, right, music find you. It wasn't the other way around, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Even if I chose not to do these things and I just did had a 9-to-5 job, I would still be doing.
That's right. Yeah.
I'd still be making this music and making these films. It'd just be on a smaller scale, and then have less time to do it. But it's still, that would still happen.
Like for me with music, right? I'm an engineer, right? As I mentioned before, I don't do to live, but I couldn't live without music, right? So I have, in the sense, quote unquote, have no choice. I got to do it. I want to do it, and put on the radio there for people to listen to good music, interview with people, great musicians like yourself. So it gave me a lot of satisfaction, right? I don't make any money, but I got my other job that I do okay. So
that's good. And have you just found in lockdown, has your listening habits changed at all? Have you listened to stuff you didn't listen to before? Is it?
It's the same. I have always been, so I don't know, in the pop, right? So I don't know, Genesis, Pink Floyd, Depeche Mode, Coldplay, Pat Benatar, Blondie, blah blah blah, and all the electronic music guys, and all the jazz rock and stuff. I listen to the same. I'm always looking for new artists. So on the good thing for me about Spotify, I'm always looking for new people. So I'm always I'm going, when I find an artist in Spotify, obviously I want to buy the music, and I will send an email to see if I can interview them. I go to Bandcamp, recommend me stuff. That's what I came across your stuff. So I'm always looking for new artists, right? And music give me a lot of satisfaction. So it's I have no choice. I need to do this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I have interviewed so many good artists, and a lot of music that nobody knows, very few
Yeah,
people know, like the Palace. That's a
yeah,
masterpiece. Why in the world, man? We cannot put in the BBC radio, of course, yes. You
yeah, and
know,
like that. Yeah, I mean, and that's what, and I miss seeing. There's a great venue in Dalston called Cafe Otto, and I miss seeing my friends, because that's where also I find a lot of, I've got a lot of great friends that find these smaller artists you never would have heard of before. And it's and going to like there used to be a music festival called All Tomorrow's Parties, which would be one artist would create it, and they would select a bunch of different artists. And I've seen some amazing people at those, people like someone like Dizzy Rascal is obviously massive now, but he was playing there before he was kind of that big. And just a lot of Ortekra and a lot of Warp people is like a lot of amazing stuff which you wouldn't necessarily have heard about if you weren't out in the kind of world. But I mean, that is a good thing about Spotify. It does, the algorithms of it does pull you into some stuff you might have not heard of before.
absolutely. Are you working in a new album at this moment?
Yeah, so I've nearly um, kind of trying to collaborate with some people I did on the soundtracks. So it's a slightly bigger ensemble, but there's a new album which hopefully we're going to finish in the next couple of months. And at the moment, it's going to be called "Sadness Be Damned." That's the kind of that's the title. And yeah, we that they've got about 6 or 7 tracks for that, and feeling good about that. We've got an amazing new celloist who's played some really beautiful stuff on there. So yeah, hopefully the next couple of months we're talking to a couple of different people as well who might be able to get it out to a bigger audience, which will be exciting.
Yeah, well, you need to keep me posted, man.
Yeah,
What are your plans for the near future? Are you hopefully doing some when the pandemic is over and things open up? Are you going to do some gigs, some touring within
yeah,
the UK as well?
we're hoping to do some gigs, and I might, yeah, we're kind of hoping to spend some time in working in Europe. My partner, she might be doing. She's a writer, so she might be doing some work in Europe. So hopefully going out to places like Berlin and Lisbon to do some shows as well. And yeah, we're yeah really eager to, because all this music's never been played live at all. It's all been released within the pandemic, so it'd be kind of really interesting to get it out there. And obviously we'd love to play in the States as well. So it's
Yeah,
yeah, we're looking forward to that.
that would be good, man. Where our listener can buy your music?
So if they Blessed are the Hearts That Bend, if you put that into Google, you can buy it. Bandcamp's the best place, but you can also get it from Apple Music and Spotify. Places, yeah.
Well, it has been a pleasure, Luke, man. I love your work. Continue working hard, no matter pandemic, no pandemic, this or that. That's your path, man. And you need to, stay positive, man. Don't worry about ignore the whole world and just continue doing your stuff. And eventually, somebody, a famous person or a radio or record label will listen to the stuff and then will open up more doors.
No, thanks, man. I appreciate chatting to you.
Your stuff is good, man. There's no question about it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
You need to be born.
Thanks for having me on.
What do you like football, soccer, that we call it here in America?
Yeah, I do. The team I support are called
Sure.
Southend. So they're like a very small team.
Yeah,
There's
okay.
not much glory in that. That was like in the small town. It's like a seaside town where I grew up. So they were like a team that was so small you could shout out insults, and the players would hear you. So so there was that. But yeah. So but I haven't. The thing is about football is that if you get too into it, the defeats, they like affect your the mentality. So I try not to. But I do. If I see a game, I do enjoy watching them. But So Washington is is there a team that you follow?
Yeah, well, no, the league here in the United States is not as good as the European league. So
Yeah.
and I like in the UK, I like Manchester City more than anything else.
Okay, yeah,
Manchester City, I love it because I like the guy who is running the thing,
yeah.
and the previous manager was a guy from Chile
Oh
as
yeah,
well. A
yeah,
couple, Manuel Pellegrini some years ago,
yeah,
and the
yeah,
guy is very, very good. So I like Manchester City, but it's very unfair because it's the same as in Spain. Either it's Barcelona or Real Madrid, right? If the
yeah,
owners are rich,
yeah.
right, they can hire the best players out there at, at any cost, right? And then the smaller teams cannot compete with them. So it's
Yeah, I mean the amount of money that's been put into Manchester City is like insane.
billions of dollars, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
uh, and Manchester United the same,
yeah. And the Manchester United thing was because they put a lot of money into their youth team. So for a long time, even though they had big money and they could buy some of those players, they also had a lot of those players were coming through their youth team. So it did feel a bit more organic. But yeah, there is. I mean, the good thing about like Manchester United is got Marcus Rashford. He's now, I think, before there's a long history of like football players not engaging in social issues, and he's a really great young player that's actually engaging with like social issues now. So there's that like a younger football player because there's food banks in England because a lot of families can't afford to eat. So I think it's kind of it's quite good that like football, and especially since the pandemic, it's like engaging with real stuff as well as like the game they play.
You mentioned food banks are still a lot of people suffering. I mean, it's difficult for the economy to start picking up again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they were even pre-pandemic. They were on there was a film called with someone who an actor called Haley, and she was in our film, and it's that is about being a young she's a young mother, and it's about using food banks and the right they're used a lot, which is disturbing in a country that's this kind of wealthy. But yeah, I think during the pandemic that they've gone up a bit. So, but yeah, these are the kind of I mean, a way that all the key workers and all the people that help keep the country going were all the people that the Conservative government historically neglected, and that's the kind of bitter irony of the situation. So there's there's a lot of my brother's a nurse, and he saw a lot. The NHS here is the national
Health
health
system.
service is like being really celebrated, obviously, because this so helping so many people, especially at this time. But for so long, there were so many cuts that now all the pressures they're feeling are the consequences of those previous, the austerity cuts. And so, yeah, there's a lot of, hopefully there'll be a lot of change because it's highlighted the need for that, and I think in the country a little bit, people took the NHS for granted. I'm hoping, that won't, for a long time, that won't be the case.
And it's a in society in the UK and well in London in particular, is it to make it into the world if you are a young kid,
Mm.
right? Is schooling the only way to make it, or people
How do you
don't
make
don't
what? In particular,
make it into the world? I mean, if you are like a middle class
Mm.
in somewhere in London, it, parents push the kids to go to college as that is the only way to make it into the world, or
No, I mean, I think that it's opening up a little bit, but we were like one of the last generations to not pay university fees. And I think we're from like working class, half middle class kind of background, but our families wouldn't be able to afford to put us through university. So I think unless you're kind of middle upper class, you can't really afford. I mean, there are grants for lower income families, but I think it's quite hard that you're going to go to university and for like the first 10 years you're going to be in like huge debt. So I think that is a it's a bit of a problem, and it's ever since the kind of the because you used to have your fees paid for, but that's not true anymore. So that has kind of, there is a certain kind of elite to going to university, which is it's not good.
Yeah, people borrow, take student loans, right? To hopefully picking a good career, and then they need to pay the stuff back, which in many ways the only way to make it, right? If you don't have enough money, you have no choice.
Yeah, and I think the you don't always like learn the most from university, but I think it's also the interaction and that time. If you just talking on the artistic approach, like that time to experiment and to kind of like find some kind of voice is quite important. You know, there's one idea that in a way a conservative government doesn't really want loads of people going to university, because loads of people going to universities, people thinking out of the system a little bit, and they prefer people to fit into it. So there's that idea which I kind of do sympathize with it.
And on the other hand, the people that they don't go to school and kind of middle class, the wages associated with, I don't know, construction work, they're decent. I mean, what's people can get like 20 pounds an hour or equivalent.
Yeah, I mean the 0 hours, all those kind of contracts aren't good if you're just doing stuff maybe while you're at university. I think you can probably get paid. The problem is somewhere like London, it's so expensive. So it's like cheap. When I moved there, you know, a long time ago now, 15 or so, even more years ago, you could get a small room and it would be, but now it's so expensive. So I think a lot of people who are like 20 aren't living in, they're moving to, Birmingham or Sheffield. And the pandemic as well, there's a bit of it's slightly overblown the press, but a bit of an exodus from London. So I think it'll be interesting to see how London, which has always been like the hub of finance and like culture in the UK and opportunity, how that changes. And it is ridiculously expensive, where you can't really, it's only really the really well-off kids that can go and do an internship at a media company or magazine or whatever, and live at home in the suburb. And if you're like a kid, even from a kind of fairly middle affluent, it's quite hard. It's only those really affluent kids. So I think the job situation is it's quite kind of scary, but hopefully I think things will pick up. It's just I think London won't be the same if it's been since this plague.
Yeah, here in the United States, it's a lot easier. If you are a bright kid, poor, you study for free, right? If you are rich kids, well, your parents can pay for your schooling fees, but there's a lot of mobility here. You can start from here and then get here in society, whatever that means. It's more opportunities, more way to make it, and there are good school, bad school, so for you need to pick where you want to study and pick a field that is rewarded and where you can make money out of it. But it's more opportunity here in the United States. So
I think in England the schools, I don't know about universities so much, because they're kind of away from that period in my life. But I think schools do seem to be, the pressure on schools to do exams is greater, but I think schools do seem to be better than when I went to school in the 80s and 90s, because I think they do think about the kids' mental health a lot more. Well, that wasn't even like when I was a kid, that wasn't even, they didn't think about designing the school so light came in, so you felt more at ease. And I think those things, again, like my brother, he's a nurse, but he does a lot of community stuff with kids. From hearing what he says, it is a lot better, even though they're are more problems with the like the digital world that people live in. Problems that way, but I think that has improved. So that it's up and down existence. You know?
Yeah. All right, man. Well, then again, Luke, was very nice talking to you. Good luck to you. Stay in touch, man. And then definitely I will send you an email. Keep me posted with your new work, and then send me an email with some artists that you recommend me to check out as well, so I can bring it over.
Yeah, I will.
To the radio, and then people can benefit from stuff. Okay, man. Take it easy, man. Good luck to you, man. Stay safe, man. Take it easy, man. Thank you.